The African savanna stretched endlessly beneath a sky heavy with the weight of dusk, the golden light fading into pale amber as shadows lengthened across the dry grass. Beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient acacia tree, a sound barely louder than the rustle of wind broke the stillness, a thin, desperate mewling that seemed too fragile to carry far. It was the cry of something newborn, something utterly alone. The leopard cub was impossibly small, her eyes still sealed shut, her spotted coat damp and matted from birth. She trembled in the cool evening air, her tiny limbs folding uselessly beneath her as she called out for a mother who would never answer. Hours earlier, her mother had been ambushed by a coalition of hyenas while moving her litter to safer ground. The attack had been swift and brutal. This cub, somehow separated in the chaos, was all that remained. The cub's cries grew weaker as exhaustion set in. She had no concept of danger, no understanding of her circumstances, only the primal need for warmth, for milk, for the presence of someone larger than herself. The world around her was vast and indifferent, filled with sounds she couldn't interpret and scents she couldn't yet recognize. Then, through the twilight, came the soft padding of heavy paws. A lioness emerged from the tall grass, her golden eyes sharp and cautious. She had been leading her own cubs back to their den when the sound reached her ears. Every instinct told her to ignore it. Leopards were competitors, rivals for territory and prey. Their young were not her concern, yet something about the sound so raw, so helpless pulled her forward. She approached slowly, her body low and tense, nostrils flaring as she scented the air. The cub's mewling intensified as the lioness drew near, a blind plea for mercy. The lioness circled once, studying the tiny creature beneath the tree. Her own cubs were only weeks old, still nursing, still utterly dependent on her. She knew the weight of that need. For a long moment, the lioness stood motionless, instinct warring with something deeper. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of her size and power, she lowered her massive head and carefully took the leopard cub into her jaws. The mewling stopped. The cub went limp, surrendering to fate, and the lioness turned, carrying the fragile life back toward her den. The den was tucked into a shallow outcrop of rock, hidden by curtains of dry brush and shadow. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the earthy scent of milk and fur. 3 lion cubs lay curled together in a tawny heap, their bellies full, their tiny paws twitching in sleep. The lioness moved through the entrance with practiced care, her body blocking the last of the fading light as she stepped inside. She paused just beyond the threshold, the leopard cub still cradled gently in her jaws. The tiny creature had gone quiet during the journey, her fragile body limp with exhaustion, and perhaps some instinctive understanding that resistance was futile. The lioness lowered her head and set the cub down on the cool stone floor, her movements deliberate and slow. For a moment, she simply stood over the tiny spotted form, her golden eyes unreadable. The leopard cub stirred weakly, mewling again in soft, broken sounds. Her small mouth opened and closed, searching blindly for something she couldn't name. The lioness leaned closer, her wet nose brushing against the cub's damp fur. She inhaled deeply, taking in the unfamiliar scent sharper, muskier than her own cubs, marked by a different lineage entirely. Everything about this moment defied the natural order. Leopards and lions did not share dens. They did not raise each other's young. Yet the cub's cries continued, thin and desperate, and something ancient stirred within the lioness. She had given birth only weeks ago. Her body still hummed with the rhythms of motherhood, the need to nurture, to protect, to respond to helplessness wherever it appeared. Slowly, she nosed the leopard cub across the floor toward her own sleeping cubs. One of the lion cubs stirred and yawned, blinking sleepily as the unfamiliar shape was pressed against its side. The lioness settled down beside them all, her large body curling protectively around the small cluster of life. She nudged the leopard cub closer to her belly, guiding the tiny mouth toward her warmth. The cub latched on instinctively, her mewling fading into the soft sounds of nursing. The lioness exhaled slowly, her eyes half closing as she rested her head on her paws. In the quiet darkness of the den, 4 cubs slept together, 3 golden, 1 spotted. The lioness watched over them all, her breathing steady and calm. She had made a choice that defied everything her kind had ever known. But in that moment, it felt like the only choice she could have made. The days unfolded in a rhythm as old as the earth itself, nursing, sleeping, the gentle rise and fall of breath in the sheltered darkness of the den. The leopard cub learned quickly that survival meant staying close to the warmth of the lioness, pressing herself between the larger lion cubs whose bodies radiated heat and security. Her spotted coat, rosettes still faint and soft against pale fur, stood out starkly among the solid tawny gold of her adoptive siblings. Yet, in the dimness of their shared space, such differences seemed to matter less with each passing hour. The lioness treated her no differently than her own blood. Each time the cubs stirred and sought her belly, she welcomed them all equally, her massive paw drawing the leopard cub close whenever she wandered too far. When the cub's tiny stomach was full and she fell back into sleep, the lioness would turn her great head and begin the patient work of grooming, her rough tongue moving over the spotted fur in long, methodical strokes, cleaning away the scent of fear and abandonment, replacing it with the familiar smell of milk and family. The leopard cub responded to this tenderness the way all young things do. She began to thrive. Her mewling grew stronger, more insistent. Her sealed eyes opened on the fourth day, revealing pale blue irises that would darken with time. She blinked against the soft light filtering into the den, seeing for the first time the golden face that had kept her alive. The lioness gazed back at her with calm, unreadable eyes, then resumed her grooming as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. By the end of the first week, the leopard cub had gained noticeable weight. Her legs, once limp and useless, now supported her body as she wobbled across the den floor. She began to explore the limited world around her with growing confidence, batting at her lion siblings' tails, climbing clumsily over their sleeping forms, testing the boundaries of her small universe. The lion cubs tolerated her with the patience of the very young, occasionally swatting back in clumsy play. The lioness watched it all with quiet vigilance. She had no way of knowing what the future held for this strange, spotted child she had chosen to save. But for now, in the safety of the den, the cub was hers. She fed when the others fed. She slept when the others slept. And slowly, impossibly, she became part of something she was never meant to belong to, a family. The first time the lioness brought her cubs out into the open air, the rest of the pride noticed immediately. They had heard rumors, of course scent carried on the wind, distant sounds from the den that seemed slightly off. But seeing the leopard cub in daylight, moving among the lion cubs like she belonged there, brought a palpable tension to the group. Several adult lionesses lifted their heads sharply, ears swiveling forward. A young male took a few steps closer, his eyes narrowing with interest and confusion. Yet none of them challenged the mother directly. The lioness met their gazes with calm authority, her body positioned protectively between them and her unusual family. After a long moment, the pride returned to their resting, though their watchful glances continued. The lioness went about her routine, as if nothing were amiss. She led her cubs to patches of shade, nursed them beneath the sprawling arms of acacia trees, and kept them close when the afternoon heat grew oppressive. But even as she treated all four cubs with equal devotion, differences were already emerging that couldn't be ignored. The leopard cub moved differently than her adoptive siblings. While the lion cubs tumbled over each other in noisy, clumsy play, she approached the world with instinctive caution, her steps lighter, her body lower to the ground. She was drawn to places the others avoided. When they sprawled in the sun-baked grass, she would wander toward the edges of their territory, where shadows pooled beneath thorn bushes and fallen logs. Her small claws, sharper and more retractable than theirs, found purchase on rough bark. She began climbing without being taught, first tentative scrambles up low rocks, then increasingly bold ascents up the trunks of smaller trees. The lioness would watch from below, torn between pride and concern, unable to follow where her spotted daughter ventured. At night, when the pride settled together in the open, the leopard cub often chose spots slightly apart from the group, nestled against exposed roots or tucked beneath overhanging stone. She preferred the cover of darkness, her eyes gleaming with a different kind of awareness. The lioness would rise and retrieve her, carrying her back to the warmth of the group, but by morning the cub would have wandered again. The pride continued to watch, wary but tolerant. The lioness continued to care for the spotted cub as fiercely as any mother could. But nature was already whispering truths that even love couldn't silence. Time moved forward as it always did on the savannah, measured not in days, but in the steady growth of young bodies and the shifting patterns of survival. The cubs grew stronger with each passing week, their legs lengthening, their play becoming more vigorous and purposeful. The lion cubs were stocky and bold, already showing the broad-shouldered build of their kind. They wrestled with abandon, tumbling through the grass in mock battles that sent up clouds of dust. The leopard cub joined them eagerly, but her body told a different story. She remained smaller, leaner, built for a different kind of power, speed over strength, stealth over confrontation. She could dart between her siblings with ease. Her movements fluid and precise where theirs were blunt and direct. When they played at stalking, she instinctively crouched lower, her spotted coat blending into dappled shadows in ways their solid gold never could. The lioness watched these games with quiet attentiveness, grooming each cub in turn when they collapsed beside her, exhausted and panting. Her devotion had not wavered. If anything, it had deepened, as though the challenge of raising such different children only strengthened her resolve. But she was not the only one watching. Beyond the immediate territory of the pride, hidden in the tall grass that rippled like water in the afternoon breeze, a male leopard had been observing for days. He was a solitary creature by nature, his territory overlapping the edges of the pride's range, but rarely intersecting with their daily movements. He had caught the scent first, something familiar yet out of place, something that pulled at instincts he couldn't ignore. Then he had seen her, the spotted cub among the golden ones, and he had understood. He kept his distance, knowing the danger of approaching a pride. Lions were powerful in numbers, and a lioness protecting her young was among the most dangerous creatures on the savannah. But the leopard returned each day, settling into the same concealed vantage point, his yellow eyes tracking the movements of the small spotted figure as she played and climbed and explored. He made no sound, gave no sign of his presence. He simply watched, patient and still, as only a leopard could be. The lioness had not yet detected him. The pride moved through their routines unaware. But the male leopard remained, drawn by something deeper than territory or prey. He watched the cub who carried his scent, his lineage, living a life she was never meant to live. The male leopard had been searching since the night everything changed. He had returned to the denning site to find only blood and silence, the scattered signs of violence telling a story he understood too well. His mate was gone. The cubs she had been moving were nowhere to be found. For most predators, this would have been the end of it, a harsh reality accepted and moved past. But something had driven him forward, a pull he couldn't name, leading him across territories he rarely traveled. He had followed scent trails grown faint with rain, tracked disturbances in the grass, listened to the whispers of the savannah carried on the wind. It had taken weeks of patient, methodical searching, moving through the landscape like a ghost, avoiding confrontation, surviving on small prey taken quickly and efficiently. Then, 3 days ago, he had caught it. A scent so faint he almost missed it, buried beneath the overwhelming musk of lions. But it was there, unmistakable. His blood, his child. Now, from his concealed position in the tall grass, he watched the impossible scene unfold before him. The lioness moved with her cubs in the golden light of late afternoon, and among them, small and spotted, was his daughter. She was alive, healthy, playing alongside lion cubs as though she belonged there. Every instinct he possessed screamed that this was wrong, that the natural order had been violated in some fundamental way. Leopards and lions were ancient enemies, competitors for the same prey, the same territory. They killed each other's young without hesitation. Yet here was his cub, nursing from a lioness, protected by the very creature that should have ended her life. The male leopard's muscles tensed as he calculated the risks. He could see the full pride scattered across the area, too many, too strong. Even if he could reach the cub, what then? She was still too young to survive on her own, still dependent on milk he couldn't provide. An approach would likely mean his death, and hers as well if the pride turned on her in the chaos. He remained hidden, watching as the afternoon stretched into evening. He saw the tenderness with which the lioness groomed the spotted cub, the way she positioned her body protectively when other pride members drew near. His daughter was alive because of this lioness. That truth settled over him with a weight he hadn't expected. For now, watching was all he could do. The waterhole lay in a shallow depression where the earth dipped low and held the last remnants of the seasonal rains. The lioness led her cubs there as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The cubs followed in an uneven line, the lion cubs bounding ahead with typical exuberance while the leopard cub moved more carefully, her eyes already scanning the landscape with an awareness beyond her weeks. The lioness kept them all within sight, her senses alert to the countless dangers that accompanied such journeys. They were halfway to the water's edge when the male leopard stepped out from behind a termite mound. He didn't rush forward or crouch into an attack position. He simply appeared, as leopards do, materializing from the landscape as if he'd been part of it all along. The lioness froze instantly, her entire body going rigid. A low growl rumbled from deep in her chest as she positioned herself between the leopard and all four cubs, her tail lashing once in warning. The lion cubs huddled behind her legs, confused but obedient. The spotted cub stood still, her small head tilted slightly, watching. The male leopard made no aggressive move. He remained where he was, several meters distant, his body language carefully neutral. His golden eyes, ringed with the distinctive markings of his kind, were fixed not on the lioness but on the small spotted figure partially hidden behind her. For a long moment, nothing moved except the wind through the dry grass. The lioness held her ground, muscles coiled and ready, but something in the leopard's stillness gave her pause. This wasn't the posture of a predator preparing to strike. The leopard's gaze never wavered from the cub. He took one slow step forward, then stopped again when the lioness's growl intensified. His ears were forward, not flattened. His tail hung low and relaxed. He made a soft sound, barely audible, a chuffing vocalization that carried no threat, only recognition. The leopard cub's ears swiveled toward the sound, something instinctive stirring in her small chest. The lioness remained tense, her powerful body a living barrier. But she didn't charge. She watched the male leopard with fierce intensity, reading his intentions in the language all predators understood. He wasn't here to hunt. He wasn't here to challenge. He was here for something else entirely, something that defied the ancient enmity between their kinds. And somehow, impossibly, she understood. The leopard cub took a small step forward, moving out from behind the protective wall of the lioness's leg. She had never seen another leopard before, had no conscious memory of her own kind, yet something in her responded to the sight of the male. His spotted coat mirrored her own, the rosettes familiar in a way she couldn't articulate. His movement, the way he held himself low and fluid, spoke to something buried deep in her genetic memory. She hesitated there, caught between two worlds, her small body trembling with uncertainty. The male leopard lowered his head slightly and made the sound again, a soft chuffing that came from his throat in rhythmic pulses. It was a vocalization unique to leopards, a greeting used between mothers and cubs, between mates, between individuals signaling peaceful intent. The cub's ears flicked forward. She had never heard this sound before, yet her body seemed to know it, seemed to understand that it carried no threat. Her tiny throat worked as if trying to form a response, though only a small chirp emerged. The lioness remained motionless, every muscle in her powerful frame taut with readiness. Her eyes moved between the male leopard and the spotted cub, measuring the distance, calculating the danger. But she didn't charge. Something in the leopard's careful stillness, in the way he kept his distance and lowered his posture, communicated intentions she could read. He was not here to kill. He was not here to take by force. He was here to see, to acknowledge, perhaps to understand the same impossible thing she had chosen to accept weeks ago. That a moment of profound silence stretched between them. The lion cubs huddled together, sensing the weight of something they couldn't comprehend. The wind moved through the grass, carrying scents in all directions. The male leopard and the lioness held each other's gaze across the space that separated them. Two apex predators who should have been enemies, bound instead by the fragile life that stood between them. Then, slowly, the male leopard began to back away. His movements were deliberate, non-threatening, his eyes remaining on the cub until the last possible moment. The lioness watched him go, her body gradually relaxing as he disappeared back into the landscape from which he'd emerged. She turned and gently nosed the spotted cub back toward her siblings, guiding them all toward the water as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But everything had changed, and they both knew it. The male leopard became a fixture on the periphery of the pride's territory, a shadow that appeared each day at a respectful distance. He chose different vantage points, a rocky outcrop one morning, the low branches of an acacia the next, always visible but never threatening. The lioness noticed him immediately each time, her head lifting sharply, her body tensing with instinctive wariness. But after that first encounter, she no longer moved to confront him. She simply watched him watching, an unspoken truce settling between them like dust after a storm. The other pride members grew accustomed to his presence as well, though they remained uneasy. A few times, younger males postured in his direction, pacing closer with stiff-legged walks meant to intimidate. The leopard would simply retreat further, melting back into the landscape until the threat passed, then reappearing once calm returned. He was patient in a way that only solitary predators could be, willing to wait for something he couldn't yet claim. It was the calls that began to change everything. In the early mornings and late evenings, the leopard would vocalize, low sawing coughs that carried across the savanna, the territorial announcement of his kind. The leopard cub would lift her head whenever she heard them, her entire body going still with attention. At first, she would simply listen, her ears swiveling toward the sound. Then she began moving toward the edge of the pride's immediate area, sitting at the boundary and staring out toward where the calls originated. The lioness would follow her, settling nearby but not forcing her back. She seemed to understand that something was stirring in the spotted cub that she could nurture but never fully satisfy. The cub would sit for long stretches, watching the distant figure of the male leopard, occasionally making small vocalizations of her own, soft mews and chirps that grew more confident with each passing day. The male would respond, his calls gentling, becoming less about territory and more about connection. The lion cubs noticed their sister's absence during these moments, but didn't follow. They were content to wrestle and play in the center of the pride's protection. But the leopard cub was increasingly drawn to the edges, to the shadows, to the voice that called to something ancient in her blood. The lioness let her go, understanding perhaps that love sometimes meant allowing space for what you couldn't provide, even when it broke your heart to do so. The morning came with a softness that belied its weight. The leopard cub had been restless through the night, rising repeatedly from where she lay among her lion siblings, pacing to the edge of the den and back again. The lioness had watched her with quiet knowing, recognizing the signs of a decision forming in a young heart. When dawn broke pale and golden across the savanna, the male leopard was already there. Positioned near a cluster of trees at the boundary of the pride's range, the cub walked toward him without hesitation this time, her movements sure and purposeful. She was older now, stronger, her legs long enough to carry her with the fluid grace that marked her kind. The lioness rose and followed at a distance, her lion cubs still sleeping behind her. She made no sound, offered no call to bring the spotted cub back. She simply walked behind her, a silent escort to whatever came next. The male leopard descended from his perch as the cub approached, meeting her at the base of a massive fig tree whose branches spread wide and thick with leaves. He touched his nose to hers in greeting, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible from such a powerful predator. Then he turned and began to climb, his movements effortless and assured. The cub watched him ascend, her body vibrating with an instinct she had practiced on smaller trees her whole short life. This was different. This was home calling. She placed her paws against the rough bark and began to climb. Her claws found purchase naturally, her body knowing exactly how to distribute weight and leverage strength. Up she went, following her father into the canopy, into the realm where leopards belonged, among the branches, in the dappled shadows, above the dangers of the ground. The lioness stood below, her golden eyes tracking the spotted form as it rose higher and higher until it disappeared into the green above. She didn't call out. She didn't try to follow where her body couldn't go. She simply stood there as the sun climbed higher, watching the tree where her daughter had vanished into the life she was always meant to live. The lioness had saved that life when it was barely beginning, had nursed it and protected it and loved it with everything she had. And now, because she truly loved it, she let it go. She turned slowly and walked back toward her pride, toward her lion cubs who would always need her. Above, in the trees, a new chapter was beginning.